It is so great to have everyone here. Welcome to the General Assembly preview. My name is Mary Rafferty. I'm the Executive Director of the Virginia Conservation Network, and I am zooming in today from Virginia Beach. I know many of you are zooming in from across Virginia as well. Welcome. We're so happy to have you here. As many of you know, VCN is the partnership of 150 conservation organizations in Virginia. We've been working for over 50 years to craft, build public support, and advocate for a shared policy agenda for Virginia's environment known as our Common Agenda. And I'm excited to welcome you to VCN's General Assembly preview this morning. This annual event gives you, our partners, and the members of our partners an inside view into what to expect during the upcoming General Assembly session. We are excited this year to be back to our hybrid model. So some of you are zooming in from the comfort of your own home, and others of you are joining your neighbors and colleagues and others for in-person breakfast watch parties. These are something we haven't had the opportunity to do in a handful of years, and I'm really excited to be back to that, and for after the preview to walk downstairs and join those of you in Virginia Beach. Before we get started, I do want to say a special thanks to our watch party hosts. So in the Fairfax, Herndon area, the Faith Alliance for Our Climate Solutions; in Alexandria, the Chesapeake Bay Foundation; in Virginia Beach, Lynn Haven River Now; in Richmond, Virginia, Interfaith Power and Light; in Warrenton, the Piedmont Environmental Council; in Fredericksburg and Stafford area, the Friends of the Rappahannock; and in Charlottesville, the Community Climate Collaborative. So thank you all so much. It is no small feat to try and figure out mainly the technology. As good as we are at Zoom after 2 years, it still trips us up sometimes. So thank you for being regional hosts, and thank you all for joining us. Today, you are going to hear from leading environmental advocates about the priority conservation issues that we expect to hear during the General Assembly this year. Hopefully, you were able to join us over the last fall to hear more in depth about each of these policy issues during our educational series. But if not, that's okay. You'll get some top lines on each of these, and then you'll have the opportunity to ask questions after each of our panels. There are 2 ways to ask questions during the panel sessions. The first way to ask questions is if you are watching virtually and you are on Zoom on your own personal computer. There is a Q&A chat box, so you can throw any questions that you have into your Q&A chat box. If you're watching from a watch party, don't worry, you can ask questions too. You can text questions to the following number, which will also be put up at the end of each panel. But if you want to get a pen ready quickly, I'll wait just a second. The phone number is 804-592-1460. Again, 804-592-1460. So that's the phone number that you can text questions to if you have them for each of the panelists. We have over 300 people that have registered for this event today, so we may not get to every question, but we'll try to get to as many of them as possible. So please do send them in. We'll also send questions that you have to the panelists afterwards, so that we can make sure that any top line questions that still may be remaining out there, we can get out to folks once we get them. All right. Again, before we dive in, the last thing I want to make sure that we do is after we get through, first of all, so after we get through all of the panelists between now and about 11 o'clock, at the end, if you are joining us in a regional watch party, you're going to get the opportunity to talk to those who are with you at your watch party to talk a little bit more about potentially regional issues that are of most interest and of note to you, and also get an opportunity to think about how to take the issues and the information that you're learning about today and get that information out to your lawmakers. The most important thing, if you take nothing else away from this event, is that it is critically important to talk to your lawmakers about the issues you care about. Particularly for us here is about all of the variety of conservation issues that you learn about, and it can be any of the things that speak to you today that you can talk to your lawmakers about. So that's what you'll get the opportunity to do if you're at a watch party. If you're watching from home, you can simply log online and reach out to your watch party or reach out to your representative individually. And then before we get started, I do just want to give a special shout out to all of the VCN staff that have helped make this event possible. So a huge thanks to Andrew Pero, to Andriana, to Nicole, and to Lisa, who have worked really hard to make this event possible. Thank you all, team, for making this event work. With that, let's start off for our preview. So here we go. Our first speaker today is Chris Leyen. Chris Leyen is from the Virginia League of Conservation Voters. And we've asked Chris, before we get into the issues, to just give us a big picture overview on what the kind of political lay of the land is right now. So as we're walking into General Assembly, what are the big things that we should expect from a big picture perspective in terms of the lay of the land? And then again, we'll get into each of the issues once we wrap up with Chris. So Chris, I'm going to pass it over to you.
Thank you, Mary, and thank you, the VCN team, for providing this opportunity. I'd like to begin our policy conversation within the context of the current and evolving political landscape that we as advocates will be navigating during the 2023 General Assembly legislative session. I'm gonna talk about this in the context of 5 elections. What we see introduced, considered, passed or defeated during 2023 will largely hinge on the results of and the projected results for 5 elections: the 2022 midterms, 2023 General Assembly elections, the Senate District 7 special, the Virginia 4 special, and the 2024 presidential. Sort of starting with the federal elections, what have those done to the existing political makeup? So first off, in the 2022 midterms, the anticipated sort of red wave election where recession, inflation, war, pandemic fatigue, low approval ratings for President Biden would result in one or both chambers of Congress flipping from Democratic control to Republican control, potentially by significant margins, didn't happen. And this is really important because it shapes the sort of confidence that pro-climate champions and those on the fence when it comes to running on the environment had politically. So we know that key to our work in the environmental space, the Inflation Reduction Act, sort of historically transformative climate legislation, was a boon and not a burden on legislators or on congressional candidates. And it also, it also impacted a lot of key state and local races as well. The sort of third takeaway that comes from the 2022 midterms really gets us into the 2024 presidential. We know that following a poor showing by the candidates supported by former President Trump, Republican elected officials are shifting away from Trump and sort of looking for a post-Trump successor, knowing that this is one of the aims. And with Governor Youngkin harboring some presidential ambitions, we know that much of the administration policy is going to continue to be shaped by the national political environment. The third election that's going to impact us happens on January 10th, the day before the Virginia General Assembly session. Following the election of Republican State Senator Jen Kiggins to Congress in the Virginia 2nd, Governor Youngkin has called for a special session to fill the vacant 7th Senate district and this is important because Virginia Beach is a major political battleground for 2023. Both parties are looking to this to as far as where the electorate is on the environment and on a host of issues. We know the region is diverse racially and socioeconomically. It's home to the port, naval facilities, a large veteran population, and it features several districts that experienced significant changes made during redistricting. And because Virginia Beach sits on the front lines when it comes to climate resiliency, water quality, and responsible economic development, it will, where the voters are there, is going to shape sort of the progress that we can make statewide on key issues for us. The race between Virginia Beach Councilman Aaron Rouse and U.S. Navy veteran Kevin Adams is going to serve as another marker where the electorate is sort of considering considering climate action and environmental policy. And second, and we know that other members across the state are going to be looking at this to sort of see where folks are, not just after November's election, but where they are at the state level here in Virginia. Secondly, after all of us remember with varying degrees of PTSD, the IRA fights at the federal level and the negotiations that ensued between Manchin and Sinema, we know the impact that a one vote margin can have on the political power of an individual member versus the majority political party generally. What happens in the 7th Senate district is really important because it's going to determine whether the Senate remains 21-19 or 22-18. And regardless of party, that shift from a single vote being the deciding vote to sort of the party leadership really changes the dynamics when it comes to policies that we can pass or defend against. Moving on to the 2023 election, all 140 seats are going to be up for election in the House of Delegates and the Virginia Senate. This year's a short session. We refer to this typically as a 45-day session, but constitutionally it's 30 days with a de facto extension for 15 more days with a special session typically used to true up the balances of a biennial budget. It is possible that we might even see a push for a 30-day session. This is probably going to come down to some leadership and finance committee members determining whether or not they're going to have time to work on the budget or whether they're down with the policy of actually shifting from 45 days to the constitutionally dictated 30 days. Short sessions are typically get in, get out mentality, get away without scars. Leadership in both the House and the Senate are going to be looking for bills that both parties think will be good for them in the upcoming elections. And why I say both parties is you're going to have House leadership on the Republican side saying, okay, what bills can we consider that we're going to see as beneficial? And those are going to be the bills that get to committee that don't get locked away in rules and just sent away to die. Same thing is going to happen on the Senate side, except that's going to be the Democrats saying, okay, what bills do we want considered and what bills do we want sort of given a really short perfunctory hearing and then not heard from again. It's all going to be with an eye towards 2023. And 2023 is a little tricky. It's the first year running in new maps. We've got more competitive seats, intra and inter-party competition, and new district compositions, meaning that you've got Republicans and Democrats running against each other, but now you've got incumbents running against one another, both between parties and amongst their own parties, sometimes having three members drawn into a legislative district, and sometimes having a seat with 0 new members, so opportunity for new leadership. We're going to see the impact of key retirements, such as that of Senator Edwards, Senator Sazla, and Senator Howell, with broad implications for both finance and for the Senate Democratic leadership. So there's some intra-party jockeying around Senate Ds to succeed Senator Sazla, and Senator Barker of Fairfax is being trained up to serve as a successor to Senator Janet Howell, who has really been one of the key figures for a long time when it comes to setting the Virginia budget. And finally, the final election that's going to impact our work is Virginia 4. With the passing of Congressman McEachin on November 28th, we lost a remarkable public servant and champion of our causes. And over the next few months, Virginians are going to undertake the difficult task of figuring out who's going to sort of stand on the shoulders of the man Senator Warner called a gentle giant, and who Speaker Pelosi honored as a tireless champion for Virginia families and a force for economic opportunity and environmental justice. Governor Youngkin has yet to announce the special election date to fill this seat. There's a lot of uncertainty about when this election could take place. We do know this seat is a 65% Democratic seat, so it's most likely that some of the leading potential candidates are going to come from the House and Senate Democrats, who some of whom filled key roles in passing environmental legislation. So Delegate Bagby, who patroned clean cars, and Senator McClellan, who patroned the Clean Economy Act, are among those who could be considered for this role. We know that this special generally takes place within 120 days when the vacancy is announced, and that it's expected it would have to be before April 26th. So there is a possibility that this election could come either within the General Assembly session or shortly thereafter, before the veto session. And moving to the veto session, sort of the last thing to consider is that when it comes to 2023, in order to file for a seat, a candidate has to reside in their district. And the Virginia Constitution doesn't have a way to deal with a candidate who is representing one district and files and moves to a new one to file. Basically, as soon as you file in your new district, you would give up the seat in your old district if those two districts don't overlap with where your house is. So when we come back to in April to consider vetoes, and crucially, the governor amendments to legislation, there's no guarantee that we're going to have all 40 members seated to take those votes. So concluding my remarks, just want everyone to sort of come away with these three takeaways. The Senate will be where will continue to be where the buck stops on climate action and environmental policy. Decisions are going to be made with elections in mind, and the environment is a winning issue we should encourage members to run on. And this year, elections, retirements, and redistricting are slated to introduce large amounts of uncertainty. This uncertainty makes the math of passing policy a little bit more difficult and more risky. In divided government, progress is made in inches. Depending on what happens, we're going to have to decide really carefully this year where we are willing to risk a mile to gain an inch as the landscape evolves. Thank you so much, Mary, and thank you, Andrew.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Chris, for that helpful landscape overview. And just as I always do, a reminder, obviously, that VCN is a 501c3 organization. We do not support or endorse any candidates. But obviously, what happens in the General Assembly is not void of politics. So it is helpful. This information that's being shared is being shared really within the context of knowing what the political landscape is, because as policy moves through, all of these dynamics are influencing it. So it's good to know. But of course, from our perspective, we do not support, endorse, or not endorse any candidates or candidate committees from a VCN perspective. Thank you so much, Chris. That was really helpful overview and background. Our first panel is what to expect on climate defense. But before I do that, somehow in my notes, I left out that the Team Shenandoah is out, and the Alliance for the Shenandoah Bay, Alliance for the Shenandoah is hosting. Sorry, Kate. And so happy to have the Shenandoah team with us. So thanks so much. All right, I am here to introduce Will Cleveland from the Southern Environmental Law Center, Blair from Climate Cabinet, and Lena from the Nature Conservancy to talk about climate defense. Will, why don't you kick us off on what to expect?
Good morning, everyone. Mary, can y'all hear me okay?
We can.
Great. Once again, it's a pleasure to be here with VCN. I want to thank Mary and all of the VCN team for pulling everything together. This is my 7th or 8th one of these, and it's always just a great opportunity to figure out what's going to happen in the legislative session. So thank you to the team. I am going to be talking a little bit about our defensive strategies for defending the Clean Economy Act. And what I want to do is start by reminding everybody exactly how the Clean Economy Act works. And some of you have heard me give the spiel more than once, so apologies for being repetitive, but the Clean Economy Act stands on 4 key pillars. The first is the mandatory timeline to retire the carbon emitting power fleet in Virginia. So all the coal plants, the natural gas plants, and everything else has to retire no later than 2045 with some interim deadlines before that for certain types of power plants. The second pillar is energy efficiency. It is the lowest form of energy generation. Is the one that you never use in the first place. And for the first time ever, the Clean Economy Act sets mandatory energy efficiency targets for Dominion, Appalachian Power, and Old Dominion Energy down in Southwest Virginia. The third is a 600% increase in the amount of rooftop solar that we can have in Virginia. And then fourth and finally is the mandatory renewable portfolio standard that requires Dominion Appalachian Power to transition to 100% carbon-free generation by 2045 or 2050, depending on the utility. And then layered across all of that are some very important provisions to ensure equity, like the percentage of income payment program that caps low-income Virginians' electricity bills at a certain fixed percentage of their monthly bill. So when we think about defense, we have to think about defending each of those 4 pillars in their own right, as well as defending the Clean Economy Act as a whole. If we look at what happened last session, we saw exactly that. We saw some efforts to introduce legislation that would just repeal the entire thing. Nick Freitas, I think, carried one or more of those bills. And then I think there was no fewer than 10 or 11 bills that would have eroded or winnowed away or watered down or weakened each of those various provisions that I just talked about. I think Terry Kilgore had 5 or 6 of them on his own. Fortunately, thanks to the heroic efforts of many of the people attending this presentation, we managed to defeat all of them. There was not a single major piece of backsliding that was introduced that managed to pass. And so everybody here should give themselves a big pat on the back and a round of applause. I would anticipate that this upcoming legislative session, we will see much of the same, but then layered on top of that, we should also expect a lot of legislation that tracks Governor Youngkin's energy plan. And I don't know how many of y'all have read that, but it nominally claims to say that the VCA is laudable in its intent, but totally unworkable in practice. And it maps out a few additional ideas for ways to either weaken or amend or make worse the Clean Economy Act. One of those is a suggestion that the Clean Economy Act should be reauthorized every 5 years. That's terrible policy in the energy space. You want consistency and a long-term vision for where we're going in Virginia. Another is a strong commitment to things like carbon capture and sequestration, or to green hydrogen or small modular nuclear reactors, technologies that are just not ready for prime time. And it suggests that we should move away from proven technologies like solar and wind and storage in pursuit of these other things. And I'm not necessarily suggesting that that SMR, small modular reactors, or green hydrogen won't someday have a role to play in the Virginia energy generation portfolio, but they are not ready now. And it is a waste of our ratepayer dollars to spend money chasing them now when solar is the cheapest source of energy available other than energy efficiency. So I think there's a lot of stuff that we will see in the energy plan that legislators will use as a model for proposed legislation. As I said, there was a large cohort of very dedicated lobbyists last session who worked to defend all those bills. And I imagine we're going to do our best efforts to do the same this year. So thanks, Mary. I'll turn it over to whoever's next.
Thanks, Will. Blair, handing it over to you to talk a little bit about the Regional Greenhouse Gas Initiative.
Awesome. Thanks. Mary, can you see my screen?
Yep.
All right, fantastic. For those of y'all who know me, I hate slides, but I'm going to do a few really quickly. And I'm going to do my best impression of Nate from SELC as well, wearing a Reggie hat today. Hi, folks. My name is Blair St. Ledger-Olsen. I am the Legislative Director with Climate Cabinet Education and our affiliated C4 Climate Cabinet Action. So today I'm going to give you a super quick rundown on Reggie. All right, next slide. Oh, went too far. See, I hate slides. So Reggie stands for the Regional Greenhouse Gas Initiative. It is a regional program that helps us tackle pollution from the power sector, which is one of the biggest sources of greenhouse gas emissions in the state of Virginia. So the sale of emissions actually from this program helps create money that our state gets to reinvest back into its communities, which help therefore to reduce carbon pollution. And these allowances are reduced every single year. And we take part in this program with a dozen other states up and down the Mid-Atlantic and East Coast. So now, why did we join Reggie? Like I said, power sector is the second largest source of greenhouse gas emissions here in Virginia. This program, combined with the Virginia Clean Economy Act that Will was just talking about, are really our two levers to help drive that pollution down. And from 2009 to 2020 in other states, we saw Reggie states have their emissions drop over 80% faster than in the rest of the United States. So it's clearly a really effective tool. And it's not only a climate tool, but there's also considerable public health benefits, as you can see here. So what does Reggie look like here in Virginia? So we joined in 2020, and there was lovely battles before 2020 as well. If you want to talk about weird budget amendments and the like, you can chat with me after. But starting in 2020, we officially joined the program thanks to SB 1027, the Clean Energy and Community Flood Preparedness Act, which the Senate patron was Lena Lewis and the House patron was Charnel Herring. So it requires DEQ to participate in RGGI, to issue new RGGI regulations and sell these allowances at the RGGI auctions. 50% of those funds are dedicated to low income energy efficiency. 45% are dedicated to flood planning and projects, and not just flooding for coastal, but also flooding for inland. And then there's about 5% that's left over for things like administration. And it's really important just to flag that Virginia has one of the most equitable designs of how we spend these RGGI funds of all of the other states. So we're really leading here and focusing on getting these dollars to the places where they can be most effective. And it's making a difference in people's lives. In fact, according to recent polling, almost 70% of Virginians support the RGGI program. But there are certain people in leadership who do not support the RGGI program, including Governor Youngkin and Republican leadership in the House of Delegates. So we saw in the 2022 session, which feels like it was 5 years ago for what it's worth. I feel like I've aged 5 years since January of 2022. We saw multiple bills to completely repeal the Virginia Clean Economy Act, and the Regional Greenhouse Gas Initiative, including from people like Delegate Freitas, as Will mentioned, as well as a few others that were targeted towards opening up the code, reducing the amount of money that we generate from this program, tactics that we expect to see again in 2023. But we're also now in a slightly different space on RGGI where we're in a regulatory program or process as well. And it's an illegal one. So Youngkin and his newly stacked Air Pollution Control Board have started an illegal process to remove Virginia from RGGI by 2023, by the end of 2023. So while we might still see those typical straight repeal bills in the 2023 session like we saw in the 2022 session, our community is not as worried about those. We will defeat those. We anticipate those to be defeated in the same manner in which we did last year. But there's going to be more work down the road at the Air Board and within advocating with the administration to try and block this illegal process. And with that, I'm going to leave extra space for questions at the end and hand things back to Mary and offer things to Lena.
Awesome. Lena, handing it to you to talk about clean cars. Lena, I think you're muted.
Yes. Okay. Can you hear me now?
We sure can.
All right. So I was just saying I like slides because I'm a visual learner. So if you can get your cameras ready, I have a QR code to share with you at the end of these slides that will lead you to a letter that you can send. So let's see, progressing now. So the Clean Car Standards is excellent climate legislation that we were able to get passed in 2021 with a large coalition. It doesn't even go into effect until 2024. We haven't seen the benefits of it yet. We've already seen a tax on it last year, and we're seeing a tax on it already this year. 7 repeal bills submitted so far. This is the best policy we have to lower greenhouse gas emissions from the transportation sector. And as you know, the transportation sector is the largest source of carbon dioxide emissions in Virginia, about half of our carbon dioxide emissions. We really need the Clean Car Standards to stay on the books. And, you know, you really need to let your legislators know if this is something you care about, that they cannot claim to be pro-climate and also vote against the Clean Car Standards. It doesn't work that way. We really need to let them know that. So far, unfortunately, the support for the Clean Car Standards has been entirely partisan. I say unfortunately just because, you know, if we get bipartisan support for something, it's much more durable, and we're seeing the impacts of that now. All of the repeal bills are coming from Republicans. And I say that this is the most in danger of being repealed because Some of the Democrats that repealed it before are a little shaky on maintaining their support, which is why we really need constituents to say that we want their continued support of this policy. So just a quick review of what the Clean Car Standards does. It has stricter standards for pollution from gas-powered vehicles, from new gas-powered vehicles than the federal standards. And also, so that tends not to be so controversial. The part that has the most climate impact and tends to be a little bit more controversial is the orange rectangle to the right that says 1% of new vehicles sold by manufacturers in the state must be zero emission vehicles, which tend to be electric vehicles. Doesn't have to be electric. And then every year that percent increases. And California, which is the state that set these standards that other states can adopt, updated those standards this year to increase that percent of new vehicles more steeply, so that in 2035 it goes up to 100%. And that's what opponents jump on. They're like, oh my gosh, we're going to 100% electric vehicles right now. We can't handle that. And they have a lot of great talking points that are not true. So why this matters, manufacturers are starting to set a lot of really ambitious goals for manufacturing electric vehicles, which we really need to reduce our carbon emissions. And we need to hold those manufacturers to it. And the way that we do that is state by state, having high standards for EV sales. And the other thing for us to press the point on here in Virginia is that those manufacturers are not distributing their EVs evenly across the country. They are sending their electric vehicles to the clean car states. And if we as constituents want access to electric vehicles here in Virginia, we need to keep our status as a clean car state. So that's the point for us. And so here's where you get your cameras ready. This QR code, if you hold your camera up to the screen, you can zero in on that and it will take you to a page that has a letter, a pre-form letter that you can send to your constituents and, or not your, no, the other way around, send to your legislators. Send your legislators to let them know that you want them to keep the clean car standards. And I will also put it in the chat for those of you who are at home. And if you miss this, it'll also come in the follow-up email. So that's it from me.
Awesome. Thanks so much. So just as a reminder, if you do want to ask questions, you can chat them into the Q&A box, or you can also text. And Lisa, can you put up the text number if you're able? We won't be able to get to each question. We did have a couple of questions come in on Reggie. So Blair, somebody asked that you please mention the air board meeting that's coming up on the 7th and what folks may be able to do around that. And then there was also a question on just how the funding is generated from Reggie and what's the impact, if any, to ratepayers.
Sure. So there is an upcoming air pollution control board meeting. I believe it is December 7th. And Reggie is on the agenda. What we anticipate during that is really an overview of their anticipated regulatory process. But it is still a great opportunity for folks if you are based near one of the locations. Sometimes they change it around, but generally it is in the Richmond area. If you're available and you want to join, contact groups like VCN or, for instance, CCAN or Sierra Club, any of these types of grassroots groups who are going to be organizing people to be present. I haven't had the privilege of holding up one of the paper mache awesome creations, but maybe one day I'll get my chance. And it's a great opportunity to make your voices heard that this is a program that we want and that needs to stay and that there is not a replacement for. Now, in terms of how the money comes in and what's the impact to ratepayers, that's a really great question. The money is essentially from the utilities. It travels essentially from the utilities who buy those allowances through the marketplace and then travels back to the Virginia Commonwealth. DHCD manages those funds in Virginia. And the impact to ratepayers is less than $2. And there are actually additional ratepayer protections, particularly for low-income communities, already built into that structure. But on average, it's less than $2. And I say on average because Dominion actually removed that Reggie rider recently. So it was less than $2, but now is actually not there at all. So we're it's a longer conversation. We're going back and forth on how to make sure ratepayers are continue to be protected with this program, but ratepayers are absolutely at the forefront of our thought and priority, and we're making sure that these programs are going right back into communities and investing in communities so that there is not a considerable ratepayer impact. Thanks.
Awesome, thank you. And then there is a quick follow-up. It seems like there's a lot of Reggie interest today. There's for the money that's been raised right now, is there a good resource or a place where somebody can go to see what has actually happened with those dollars that have been generated thus far, and what is what are the benefits on the ground right now that are happening from that investment?
There absolutely is, and I will go find the link. Unless Skip, you have it on hand, but Wetlands Watch did an amazing job of mapping out all of the districts. I think actually VCN, there might be a VCN page for that as well. But while I'm off, I will go find that link and I will drop it in the chat for folks that shows where these dollars have been invested per district. It's not just places like Norfolk. We're seeing low income energy efficiency housing being supported across the state, including right here in Charlottesville, where I'm from. We are seeing flooding go to support inland flooding crises. And then we are seeing it in places like Norfolk, which as in Hampton Roads, which as Chris said at the beginning, is the second highest place threatened by sea level rise in the entire country. So I will go find that and I will slap it in the chat, and don't thank me for it because I didn't do it.
For those watching from a watch party, we'll also get that link out as well. And Will, I know that this is not your issue at SELC, but there is a question about whether or not this issue will end up in court. And I don't know if you are better prepared to answer that particular question.
Whether Reggie will end up in court?
Correct.
Yeah, so the legal issue is that Youngkin is trying to use the regulatory process to repeal the Reggie program. And we, as Blair said, that is illegal because the Community Flood and Preparedness Act requires Virginia to have that program. And so I would anticipate, depending on what this regulatory process that's going on through looks like at the end of it, and we're 18 months away from the end of it, it is possible it may end up in court arguing that the Young administration's entire regulatory process is illegal. But none of that can happen until the regulatory process itself is done. And we're a long ways away from that.
Awesome. Well, just a huge thanks to this panel. I know that there are more questions coming in, which is awesome. We don't have enough time for all of the questions on our climate defense campaign, but these are the ones to ask. And we're getting a very cute view from Will's screen. We will do our best to get these questions back out to those who are asking them. So thanks so much for participating. Thanks to our climate defense panel. And we are going to go over to our clean water and climate resilience panel. So we have three folks joining us. Anna from the James River Association, Chris Moore from the Chesapeake Bay Foundation, and Skip Stiles from Wetlands Watch. And Anna, we're going to start off with you to hear a little bit about what to expect from a bay and water perspective.
Thanks, Mary. So I don't have a slide for you today because I really want to encourage you to use a new resource when it comes to budget priorities in general and clean water budget priorities specifically. So this year, for the first time, our common agenda includes a paper entitled Investing in Clean Air, Clean Water, and Healthy Lands. You'll find that in the Good Governance section of the common agenda. And that paper brings together all of the funding needs for all of the many priorities within our agenda. And as we approach the General Assembly and throughout the budget process, I really want to encourage you to use that paper in your advocacy when it comes to securing resources that we need to protect our environment and get done all of the policies that you're hearing about today and then some. So the budget is critically important for getting this work done. But I am going to highlight just a few of the budget asks in the clean water section. As you know, our shared goal of restoring the bay has a deadline to put all the necessary practices in place by 2025. That's a deadline that all of the jurisdictions within the Bay watershed have agreed to. That's what they're all fighting for right now. We are entering the 2023 General Assembly, at which time we will be negotiating the 2024 fiscal year budget. And that means 2025 is right around the corner. We have a lot of work left to do, and we need the funding in place for for really critical programs that deliver cleaner water and healthier rivers and streams that ultimately mean a healthy Chesapeake Bay. So first, we need to continue funding our agricultural cost share program, which gives farmers the resources and technical assistance they need to adopt certain conservation practices that keep nutrients and sediment on their fields and out of their local streams. We've secured some major investments for this cost share program in the past few years, particularly last year. It was kind of a banner year for us in that program. But what we've seen is that inflation is already cutting into how far that funding will go. So we need to see additional funds for the agricultural cost share fund program. We need to see some funding to kind of tuck away and save for maybe those leaner years where we don't have opportunities and we need to go into our stores to help fund that program. And then we need to really support the staff on the ground, the boots on the ground that get this work done, our soil and water conservation districts and the technical assistance that they provide. Second, we need to invest in modern technology and treatment upgrades for the wastewater treatment plants across Virginia and really within the Chesapeake Bay watershed. Plant upgrades mean that when we are sending wastewater to our treatment facilities, they have a better time of pulling any of the nutrients and pollutants out of that water before it eventually enters our rivers and streams. But those upgrades can be expensive, and that cost kind of follows through to our localities, our cities, our communities. The state can help pick up some of that cost and really should be part of the answer here to get these critically important upgrades in place and to make sure that wastewater is cleaner when it enters our rivers and streams. So really tackling that problem and putting a lot of state funding to wastewater treatment upgrades is a huge focus for us this year. And then finally, we need to tackle polluted stormwater. And this is one of the trickiest sources of pollution to our rivers and streams because it is so spread out. It's coming from every road and building and paved area you can think of. It's that stew of stormwater that picks up pollutants and flows into our rivers. Localities can put practices in place, can do management projects that help clean that stormwater, filter the pollutants out before it reaches our streams. But they need funding, again, to help them get that work done. So the state can put money into our stormwater local assistance fund that helps localities pay for those projects and can help prevent localized flooding in communities because they're doing more to get that stormwater infiltrated into our ground before it can overrun our stormwater pipes and projects. Those are just three of the funding priorities within the clean water space and really within the broader conservation needs that we have. We have budget needs that include things like climate resilience and land conservation, transportation and renewable energy. So I really encourage you to look at that paper I mentioned at the top, investing in clean air, clean water and healthy lands, and really looking for things that meet your values so that you can work on your budget advocacy throughout the General Assembly.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Anna. And we will send out resources to everyone who has registered today. So if you don't have a hard copy of the briefing book, but you do want to look up the paper that Anna recommended online, we will have links to that will go out to all participants. So thank you, Anna, for flagging that. Next, Chris Moore with the Chesapeake Bay Foundation to talk about fisheries.
Good morning. Thank you, everyone. And I want to also thank Anna for talking about kind of the tough parts of clean water, the pipes and concrete and things like that are really important to cleaning our waterways and actually protecting our fisheries here in Virginia. I feel like I drew the long straw because I get to talk about the critters, which is really cool. So anyways, I hope folks will, much like Anna mentioned, will go visit the fisheries and wildlife papers that we have in the briefing book this year. A number of different topics that are in there that I think people may really get a great interest in reading and learn a lot about. Those of you as Virginia residents know that we have plentiful fisheries and wildlife resources in Virginia. We have such a diversity of habitat from the Shenandoah Valley down to the largest estuary in North America with the Chesapeake Bay, that we have lots of different resources that we need to protect is what it amounts to. And so as part of that, one of the things that we need to do is make some investments in those resources in order to be able to have healthy fisheries and wildlife resources moving forward. So I'm going to hit on about 3 different things real quickly that we're looking to invest in this year. So I'm hopefully going to share my screen. So the first that we have is is our blue crab resource, which, as many of you all know, blue crabs are one of our iconic fisheries in Chesapeake Bay, and something that we've been working very long to protect. You may have heard news earlier this spring, unfortunately, that blue crab numbers are not as healthy as they have. This is an estimate of the population since about 1990. And during that time, you can see we've had some ups and downs, not to be unexpected when it comes to blue crab populations. But as you can see, over the last 3 years, we've been on this somewhat concerning downward trend. So one of the budget investments we want to make sure that we make this session is appropriating the dollars necessary to do what we call a blue crab stock assessment. This is basically an estimate of the population of blue crabs within the entire Chesapeake Bay. And this is a partnership with Maryland, Virginia, and the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, NOAA. Each organization, or the 2 states in the organization, are going to fund about a third of this effort. And it's about a 1.5 year long process. It's about $225,000. So it's a fairly small investment that we actually need to make when it comes to Virginia. Moving to another shellfish resource, which I like to talk about and is gaining a lot more interest along the state, are our freshwater mussel resources in Virginia. We have a tremendous diversity of freshwater mussels throughout the Commonwealth, and we have different mussels in different river systems, and a lot of our clean water quality efforts are going to help improve mussel habitat as well. But one of the things we need to do is make investments in our hatchery infrastructure in order to breed more of these mussels and be able to use them in restoration projects. And so 2 different pieces of investments that we're noting for the upcoming session this year. One is a $5 million initial investment in the Aquatic Wildlife Conservation Center at the Butler Fish Hatchery in Southwest Virginia. This would actually deal with mussels primarily out on the western part of the state. And then here in the eastern part of the state, we're hoping to see a $2 million investment in the Virginia Fisheries and Aquatic Wildlife Center, which some people may remember that being referred to as the Harrison Lake National Fish Hatchery, which is over here in the eastern part of the state. And so both of these would be real wise investments in helping to increase our mussel populations in Virginia. And then oysters, always a good topic here in Virginia. It's obviously, we're deep into our R months now, so it's a great time to be eating oysters throughout Virginia. But as you know, Virginia has made a number of investments in oyster restoration over the past 5 to 10 years. And so one of the things that we have wanted to do with this year's efforts is try to figure out a way to increase the amount of shell that's available for both our industry and our restoration projects. This is a picture from Hampton many years ago, but this is all oyster shell. Hopefully you can see the 3 men actually standing on that pile of oyster shell. And for many years, unfortunately, we weren't recycling oyster shell. We were using it for many other reasons, for many other purposes, mostly construction related. And now we're trying to really do a good job making sure that the shell is not used for anything except for going back in the water. So we're looking at a tax credit based system for businesses that would help create some additional incentives to recycle oyster shell throughout the Commonwealth. And so this is, we think, is a neat alternative approach where it doesn't require an expenditure per se by the state, but allows businesses to become involved in these type of efforts, no matter where they are throughout the state. And also, we feel like this is a good way to try to move this program forward, because it wouldn't make any mandatory type program from that. So that's all for me. Thank you all. Look forward to having some questions.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Chris. And then Skip Stiles with Wetlands Watch. Skip, you want to hop on and let us know what's going on in the world of resiliency?
Sure do. Thank you. Good day, everyone. So I'm going to run you quickly around the world of resilience here and the upcoming session, and it's pretty simple. We are in big defensive mode when it comes to resilience policy. And this is going to be one thing we're going to have to really stress this year. The reason is Virginia has the most robust set of state policies, laws, and regulations to deal with sea level rise and climate change of any state in the country. We have the funding, we have RGGI, we have that, but we also have had changes to our tidal wetlands program, our Chesapeake Bay Preservation Act, even our septic regulations to include climate change. And again, we're the only state in the country that's doing this. So a lot of things to defend, a lot of things to brag about when you speak to legislators. We, in the 2020-2021 sessions, created a Chief Resilience Officer. The Northam administration took a number of administrative actions that, again, are first in the nation. We even had VDOT kick in with the most robust set of climate standards for bridges, their engineering standards of any VDOT, any Department of Transportation in the country. So a lot to defend. In the 2022 session, there was an attempt to encode a lot of this, take some of these administrative actions, these plans, update them, put them into law. We had some success there. Our attempts to better coordinate all of these programs across the agencies didn't do very well. We attempted to put better oversight on the Community Flood Preparedness Fund and RGGI. That didn't do too well either. But coming into this session, it looks pretty much like we're going to be completely defensive. The one provision that may pop up this session is an attempt that comes out of last session by Delegate Bulova to include climate change into the requirements for comprehensive plans. Every locality in Virginia has to update their long-range land use plans every 5 years. In Hampton Roads, we have a provision that the late Senator Miller put in that requires us to do sea level rise in our comp plans, but the rest of the state has nothing. And so Delegate Bulova last year attempted to put climate change in the comprehensive plan updates. It was defeated. He's probably going to come back with us again because the Chesapeake Bay Commission has cited this as one of the needs that that we need to take up. The prospects for it, yeah, we'll see how it works. You can look for bills on creating a flood board, again, oversight of the flood preparedness program, some revision, some revival of attempts to put flood resilience planning in the VDOT works, but there are a lot of barriers to the enactment of these provisions, and the administration will probably oppose them pretty vigorously. The one place we are expecting some back and forth and some fighting again is in the budget process. Last year, we saw a diversion of some of the funding from the Community Flood Preparedness Fund. One of the diversions was to fund, help fund the flooding down in Buchanan County. They subsequently had another flood event, and Governor Youngkin, when he was down there after the flooding, said that he was wanting to set up a flood recovery fund. So we're going to watch very carefully to see if there are attempts to take money out of the Community Flood Preparedness Fund, divert some of that RGGI money and put it into some separate flood recovery fund. So that is pretty much what's going on in the resilience space. And I know it feels like this oftentimes when we're dealing with the legislature, but remember, Mickey won in the end. So I think that we're going to come out on top as well. So with that, I will turn it back.
Awesome. Thanks, Skip. I think we'll need to put that up on the TV during legislative committee this year. I think you gave us a good idea. So panelists from this, you can come up and show us your faces real quick. So we're going to do Q&A real quick on this one, and then we'll have you back. If anybody has any questions, again, you can either text or chat them in. There is one question about the DCR's rubric for doling out community flood preparedness money. So Skip, I think I'm going to hand this one to you. The person's legislator says that the money is skewed towards urban areas and not rural areas. And just wanted to know if there was a way to expand the funds for more rural areas. Do you have any comment or thoughts on that question?
Yeah, it is true. The bulk of the money in the first couple rounds went to the urban areas, but it's because they already had plans in place. Because of sea level rise and the direct impacts that we felt, and because of the resources available to places like Virginia Beach and Norfolk and Portsmouth and Hampton, they had plans in place. They had preliminary project designs. And so when the money came out, the bulk of that initial money went to them. But the Community Flood Preparedness Fund is a phased process that has a lot of planning and capacity building money. And that money is the stuff that the rural areas, and especially in Valley and South Side, that those parts of the state are going to take advantage of. And we have an effort that's underway right now to do outreach in the Valley and South Side to help places like Dickinson and Wise and Buchanan County, which got a planning grant, participate more vigorously in it to overcome that apparent, leaning towards the urban areas. The program does not lean towards urban areas. So we're trying to get more awareness of the program out in the Valley and South Side.
Awesome. That is super helpful. Thanks, Skip. Anna and I think Chris, you probably could both comment on this. You both talked a lot about the specific dollar amounts that we're asking for in the budget. Maybe Anna, this is the best for you, but could you just kind of walk through what that process is? So we're in a 2-year budget process. Is the governor going to introduce another budget? How does that kind of happen? And where should folks be keeping an eye out for budgetary actions?
Yeah, so we're in the second year of Virginia's 2-year budget. It's a biennium budget. What the governor is going to propose on the 15th of December is our amendments to the current budget bill. And those amendments are largely going to affect the funding as we enter the 2024 fiscal year. But he could also look back and make some changes to 2023 as well. So all of this is about amending the existing budget. So when I say that we got some great things in the budget already, that's because they're already there. They will already come to pass in 2024 if no changes are made. But we have the opportunity to get a little more, to do a little better, and to maybe fund some other priorities we weren't able to when we helped craft the original budget we're under right now. So it's all about amending what we're currently using right now.
Awesome, super helpful. Thank you, Anna. Well, those are the questions we have for our Clean Water, Resilience, and Fisheries panel. I just want to thank you all so much for joining us. And you're welcome to stick around and continue to watch and hear from our next panel here. But thank you all so much for joining us as panelists today.
Thank you.
Our next panel is other things that you can expect. And I'm going to keep an eye out here. We've got Stuart Schwartz from the Coalition for Smarter Growth, Kate Wofford from the Alliance for the Shenandoah Valley. And also we are hoping to get back Peter Anderson from App Voices, who just texted me with tech problems. But Stuart, why don't we start from you, and Kate, I'll probably have you go next so that we can give Peter a minute more to get back on. So Stuart, tell us what's going on land use and the governor's housing plan.
Okay, thanks everybody. Stuart Schwartz, Coalition for Smarter Growth, VCN board member, land use everything. I was at the Governor's Housing Conference. It's always called the Virginia Governor's Housing Conference. The governor showed up on Friday. I wish he'd been there the whole time to hear what was going on. As you know, Wyatt and I have been working on strengthening conservation relationships with the housing advocates, affordable housing advocates in the Commonwealth. And also we're doing a lot in Northern Virginia, where CSG has been a member of the Northern Virginia Affordable Housing Alliance for a long time. On Friday, November 18th, the governor came, made a big speech about his Make Virginia Home Again agenda. If you were there live to hear how he spoke about it, and if you look at his agenda, and if you look at his quotes in particular, there's a lot to be worried about on one hand. And then I'll get to some of the things where there are other possibilities for hope. But he had quotes like, we have to have more developer-friendly local regulations and processes. We also have to respect the rights of landowners, and you can interpret that a couple different ways. The solution to this problem is not more subsidies or loan programs, which indicates to me that he's not interested in purely affordable housing and the real need there. And the affordable housing advocates at the state and in the Richmond region and in Northern Virginia are pretty skeptical, honestly, if it's not targeting the truly affordable problems we're having at 80 and 60% AMI of area median income and below. He's really going after regulation, which he calls unnecessary regulation, overburdensome and inefficient local governments, restrictive zoning policies, and fighting tooth and nail against any new development. And he's also tied this to his economic agenda. You just saw this week, he announced a $350 million proposal to subsidize more really industrial development, distribution centers, warehouses, probably data centers. It's something that's already happening in the Commonwealth. The Go Virginia thing that the Chambers of Commerce got passed a couple of years ago, and other changes have meant a lack of transparency and an aggressive push for mega sites and big industrial areas. The fact that we're in the mid-Atlantic and on the I-95 corridor and with the Port of Virginia indicates why we're seeing these pressures. Honestly, I think we are seeing the largest potential transformation of Virginia's landscape in our history, even more so than the interstate highway system or the rise of suburbia, and because of the scale of these industrial sites. But this is the housing piece of it, arguing for more housing to meet the workforce needs of the growth that he wants. That said, there is a real housing problem. We have not been producing enough housing. Some of it, a lot of it is supply, a lot of it is workforce. Some of it ties to our land use policies. It is going to be a complex political environment. Wyatt and I and others, and I would like to have you all email us if you want to volunteer to be part of a core group that is going to assess what's happening and to meet with counterparts. We have to meet with our housing partners at Virginia Housing and the other housing advocates. We have to meet with developers' attorneys. We have to meet with VACO and VML to play really three-dimensional chess like we often have to do in this business to figure out where to go. Building up to this has been both a left progressive push for the need for more housing and more affordable housing, a libertarian push, including from the Mercatus Center at George Mason University, about removing zoning restrictions so we can just have more supply, let the market provide more supply. And the libertarians at Mercatus do not support inclusionary zoning. They do not support agricultural areas and rural areas. They think it restricts housing supply and the operation of the marketplace. At the same time, we've had two reports from McGuire Woods about racial equity and segregation and what its role has been in our housing supply. And honestly, they're good reports. And if you look at their recommendations in their phase 2 reports, and I will provide a summary of all this to everybody. If you look at the phase 2 reports, it includes many of the agenda items that we support: inclusionary zoning, housing and comprehensive plans, mixed use development, accessory dwelling units. There is a lot to like in that McGuire Woods, those studies. Unfortunately, at a Mercatus event, one of the McGuire Woods lobbyists, one of their top lobbyists, said, "We don't need the rural crescent and agricultural reserves. We need more housing." So what I'm going to need from everybody is the core group of us who are going to work on these issues. We're going to meet with partners. I will need our rural farm and forest folks to be attentive to what this impact could be in your jurisdictions and to weigh in. And we've already talked to the Chesapeake Bay Foundation, and we need other water allies to look at their efforts, the governor's efforts also to weaken the wetlands and wetlands mitigation rules and approaches. So there's a lot we're going to have to track here. There's also an environmental streamlining approach to it as well. So U.S. is down 1-0 to Netherlands. I feel like the conservation community is often down about 1-0, but with teamwork, we will be able to, I think, fight back, at least get to a draw. But I think we could actually leverage this as well. And my final thing is, look at California. We just heard Peter Calthorpe, the great urbanist from California. Their approach is to put all the mixed and the housing growth in their declining strip commercial corridors where it's already paved over, which is a smart growth thing we've always talked about. So I'll stop there. Thank you.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Stuart. Appreciate that. And I hope we didn't blow the game for anybody who was holding on to it to watch it later.
Oh my God, I'm sorry.
I don't know. All right, Kate Wofford is up next to talk about a big topic in the community on solar siting. So Kate, why don't you go next, and then we've got Peter right after you. Go ahead, Kate.
Great. Thanks, Mary. Can y'all hear me?
We sure can.
Good. So I am zooming in from the Shenandoah Valley from our Harrisonburg watch party, where we have a terrific group of people here and some really good breakfast snacks. And I'm here to talk about solar siting and specifically a helpful bill that passed the legislature last session, HB 206. This is legislation that encourages more thoughtful siting of utility scale solar projects by requiring mitigation of impacts to prime farmland and healthy forests. Virginia is transitioning to renewable energy. And if we're smart, we will make rapid progress in this transition, but we'll do it in a way that we don't go backwards on the progress that we've made for decades on clean water and protected farm and forest land. We in the Shenandoah Valley and a lot of partners, VCN partners across the Commonwealth, especially in rural areas across the Commonwealth, have been working hard to get it right with solar in our communities. And as we heard from Will Cleveland just an hour ago, there's broad agreement among Virginians that we really want to see rooftop solar, solar on parking lots, solar on brownfields first, and then where we know we're going to also have to build some greenfield solar, we need to be sure to do it thoughtfully and with natural resources and communities in mind. But the reality is, for the first couple years of this transition, that's not what we're seeing as much as we need to. And so HB 206 last session was a really important step in the right direction. I want to mention Dan Holmes at Piedmont Environmental Council was a real champion and key to getting this bill through, with a lot of help from the Nature Conservancy and Chesapeake Bay Foundation. And when it becomes effective, HB 206 will require that solar developers, if they impact 10 or more acres of prime ag lands or 50 or more acres of contiguous forest, have to provide mitigation. The legislation set up a stakeholder group that met this past year, and then next year DEQ is to develop the regulation, and then it will become effective after that. So essentially, we hope there will not be any efforts to weaken or further delay the enactment of this important legislation. And if there are efforts to do that, I think there will be a strong coalition, of which we're eager to be part of that, to try to block any weakening of HB 206 and our progress towards thoughtful solar siting. So.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Kate Wofford. And next is Peter Anderson to give us an update on fossil fuel and mining infrastructure, one of the other things we always expect to see during session. Peter, take it away.
Hey, thanks, Mary. Peter Anderson with Appalachian Voices here in our Charlottesville office. And I'm going to go ahead and, if I can, share my screen. I got a couple of slides. So let me do that. Okay. And let's go ahead and start the show. You know, PowerPoint's always different from Google Slides. Mary, you can see my screen though, right?
We can see your screen. We can just see the whole screen.
Right. I'm trying to get into the
slideshow to the right. Top right corner.
There we go. Let's start the slideshow. Awesome. Thanks. So yeah, like Mary said, here to talk about some of the political landscape surrounding fossil fuel and mining infrastructure in Virginia. As Mary said, it's an issue that comes up every year, and there's certain things that we can do in Virginia and certain things that are more in the federal landscape. So without further ado, this is the Virginia General Assembly preview, obviously, but I do want to talk briefly. There's so much interest in the Mountain Valley Pipeline, and Virginians have been opposing this project since it was proposed in 2014. So I'd be remiss if I didn't mention it, even though it's not exactly a state issue right now in our General Assembly. So on Capitol Hill in DC, people may be aware that Senator Manchin from West Virginia, who favors the project, has tried to introduce legislation that would essentially exempt Mountain Valley Pipeline from a lot of the federal environmental laws and allow that project to move forward without further litigation. Thanks to people like you who are engaging on this with us, calling your senators, calling your representatives. This effort failed in September when Senator Manchin tried to attach his legislation to a must-pass bill called a continuing resolution that funds the federal government. We do expect to see an effort very similar for this bill to be attached to some other must-pass legislation either this month in December after the Tuesday special election in Georgia, or early next year in January when the new Congress begins. So I'd be remiss if I didn't mention this, and then I'll get back to the Virginia General Assembly. But we do have an action you can take. There's a link on this slide, and we'll make sure that that gets shared around to contact your senators and representatives to ask them to oppose this effort. Back to Virginia. So what does it look like in Virginia this year when it comes to gas infrastructure? Just a quick reminder, last year we were playing defense, and a lot of that is due to the divided government politics that we have in Virginia right now, with the Senate and House controlled by different parties. I think some of the signals we've seen from the governor's office is that, you know, Virginia is more welcoming to fossil fuel infrastructure again. So I would not be surprised to see some similar efforts that we saw last year that we had to fight. And we were successful last year on something called HB 1257, which would have established a sort of so-called right to natural gas service, and would have prohibited efforts at the state and local levels to electrify our buildings. And so big picture, this is important because, you know, from a climate perspective, we do need to decarbonize our buildings in terms of how we heat them, what we cook with, et cetera. So efforts like HB 1257 go against our efforts for a clean energy economy and must be defeated. I would expect to see a similar bill this year, and we will just have to fight that same fight and win it once again. I would also just mention, I would expect, given those sort of political signals of Virginia being more welcoming to gas, I would expect other efforts that we didn't necessarily have previewed for us last year, but sort of relaxed permitting, things that make it easier to build pipelines and compressor stations, things that make it easier for the gas industry to expand when we, of course, from a climate perspective, need to be shrinking the gas industry in the Commonwealth. And then the other thing I wanted to put on your radar is when it comes to gold and other critical minerals and metals mining in Virginia. This has been a saga going back to the 2021 session, when a bill actually passed the Virginia General Assembly in 2021, as companies expressed interest in renewed interest in mining for gold and perhaps also copper, lead, and zinc. These are proposals to mine at a very large scale. And it turns out that Virginia had some gold mining occur historically. You know, we think of the Wild West, but this actually did happen in Virginia a long time ago. And there's actually what's called a gold pyrite belt stretching from Northern Virginia and Fairfax all the way down to the North Carolina line, kind of through the center of the Commonwealth. So it's something to be critically aware of. The bill that passed in 2021 required a study on whether our regulations and laws are sufficient to protect our resources, like our water, from gold mining operations. A report just came out from the National Academies that said, no, Virginia's current regulatory apparatus is insufficient to address gold mining at this scale. So we need to do something about that. Last year, we were supportive of HB 250, which would have placed a moratorium on mining of some of these minerals until further study had been done. That bill did not pass. So this year I would be on the alert for a different bill to support. I'm not 100% sure that this bill will be filed, but I think it's a strong likelihood that there will be a bill to support that would prohibit the use of cyanide in mining for things like gold. Cyanide is used as part of the process to extract gold and separate things out. So I would look for a bill that would prohibit the use of cyanide. That is a way to slow down this large-scale, highly impactful practice where we've seen in different parts of the world for large-scale gold mining. So with that, I'll turn it back to Mary.
Awesome. Thank you so much to Peter, Kate, and Stuart. We don't have time for questions for this panel to keep us running on time, but thank you all so much. If folks do have questions, I am happy to share contact information and again, send these questions to the panelists as well. So I know I've been doing that along the way for some of the questions we haven't had the chance to get to. One of the questions though, which was a good one, was, well, how do we get more solar on rooftops in response to Kate's point that that is a place that we should prioritize as we are transitioning to our 100% clean energy future? And the good news is we are just about to get to that answer. So I'm excited for our next panel. We are welcoming McKenna Dunbar to talk about solar on schools from the Sierra Club, Laura from Clean Virginia to talk about energy burden and rate reform, and Victoria from CCAN to talk about how we can transition some of our transportation mileage onto things like buses and electrifying our buses so that we're not just talking about personal vehicles. So with that, McKenna, are you here? And would you like to go ahead and get started?
Good morning, everyone. Thank you, Mary, for that introduction. And thank you for the person who asked the question about how we can expand rooftop solar throughout the Commonwealth. I will be sharing some slides momentarily. Great. So the central question that this presentation seeks to address is how can schools be a part of advancing Virginia's clean energy transition? And my name is McKenna Dunbar. I'm with Sierra Club, acting as their building electrification lead. And in line with Sierra Club's goals of promoting a clean energy future rooted in equity and sustainability, the collective work that all of us are doing emphasizes the importance of net zero schools and the imperative role that they can play in the fight against the climate crisis. Solar schools, as we all know, can lower energy consumption, emphasize environmental stewardship in communities, and also encourage programming that really promotes sustainable development in a major emissions sector of our nation and of our state as well. And for this reason, school districts should pursue net zero in all new construction projects and set goals to substantially reduce energy use in major renovations. And as it relates to net zero schools costing less to operate, they also provide opportunities for hands-on learning for students, reduce costs related to extreme weather events, and also create healthier indoor environments for the facilities. And better education and long-term savings are truly possible through net zero school building design. To give an overview of the piece of legislation that will be presented in the upcoming General Assembly, Senator Favola will be acting as the state sponsor, while Delegate Subramaniam will act as the House sponsor. And this past General Assembly session, SB 290 passed the Senate on party lines, but failed in the House General Laws Committee, mostly along party lines. And despite an existing preemption under paragraph D, Republicans did object to paragraph F's perceived mandate for net zero schools due to the requirement for the locality to conduct a cost analysis before exercising the exemption, and this was seen as quite burdensome. Originally, our policy recommendations surrounded 3 key items. One of them was requiring new school buildings and substantially renovated school buildings to be designed and built to net zero standards with solar ready roofs, enabling the addition of solar at no upfront cost through PPA financing or other types of financing methods. The second one was to create a school superintendent ombudsman position on clean energy transition within the Department of Education. And this position would be responsible for liaising between school division leaders and contractors in order to save taxpayer money and make buildings healthier. And some of their duties would have included connecting school divisions in the design or redesign phase with solar installers to get consultations for that. And then the third that we also offered was that the General Assembly should create a gap fund for school divisions to access. And since we've published this in the VCN Common Agenda, we've decided to make additional changes in order for a smooth passage through the Senate and House in 2023. And for that reason, we have decided that line 54 would now specify that the roof of a school or public building with a structural capacity to accept the increased load would be more narrowly defined. It would more narrowly define the type of roof that the line alludes to. Then, as it relates to line 58, it would now expand on who will determine the practicality of solar panel installation by stating that both school boards or the governing body of the locality can elect this type of equipment, not just the governing body of the locality. And line 73 would now include school district alongside the language of localities entering the design or redesign phase for a new building. And we added language to the section that ensures that schools are covered by the requirement that localities follow high performance building standards and installing solar ready roofs, because it is not clear that existing law applies to schools as well as local government buildings. And so we felt the need to refer to schools specifically. And smaller items are reflected in the change to lines 101 to 106, which would be deleted. And one more change to the last line of the piece of legislation would be to change the year from 2023 to 2024. And although these changes lose the net zero language that we hope to have had included in this iteration of the bill, the passage of this legislation would result in most new schools being designed with solar ready roofs, and a school, as we know, can be made net zero at no additional cost if the solar roof is planned for in advance and if it is designed to high performance standards anyways. And so it really is in the best interest of taxpayers and students and school boards fundamentally to take full advantage of solar by making their schools and their school facilities all electric, and really using good design practices to achieve these net zero results and make solar ready roofs the standard. And as we all know, we are at a key point as part of the clean energy transition where there are incentives to take advantage of solar in order for schools to achieve the net zero result. And under IRA, the Inflation Reduction Act, local governments and schools have added incentives to due to the investment tax credit being increased to 30%. The credit is now refundable for tax exempt entities like governments, like local governments who previously could not have taken advantage of this opportunity. And this really does open up more options beyond the PPA, but beyond third-party power purchase agreements, which are referred to as PPAs, which allow localities to consider other financing options to maximize cost savings. And our hope is that the changes that we propose and the fiscal incentives for installing and expanding solar across Virginian schools will make the passage of this bill easier and promote our clean energy transition in the Commonwealth.
Awesome. Thank you so much, McKenna. Appreciate that. I know a handful of questions have come up. McKenna, can you just put up your email address really quickly one more time as we're transitioning over to Laura? Because I know that there were some questions that came through that we probably won't have time to get to. So I want to make sure that folks have access to your email address, can write it down quickly, because I think this is a really great subject that folks have a lot of questions about getting more involved. With that, I want to transition over to Laura with Clean Virginia. Laura, it's so great to have you here. Tell us more about energy burden and rate reform. What are you guys up to this year? Nope, you are still muted.
Yes. Thank you, everybody. Can you see my screen? Okay.
Yep.
Yeah, so thank you for having me. And McKenna, thank you so much for that excellent presentation. So indeed, rooftop solar will help us decrease our carbon emissions, but also will help us reduce electricity bills. And this is the main focus of my conversation today. How do we achieve a clean energy transition that is also affordable? And so to answer this question, first, I'm gonna talk about really quickly about the affordability challenges in the state. Then I will focus on the rate reform we need and we will pursue to ensure electricity prices are fair. So I want to start by saying that Virginians pay some of the highest electricity bills in the nation. We're number 13. And this situation is going to become worse this winter because the Energy Information Agency forecasts that home heating bills will rise 17% nationwide due to higher natural gas prices, higher electricity prices, and a cold winter. And Virginians are already feeling this impact. Dominion Energy increased its bills by $15 a month, and APCO also requested a monthly increase of $20 a month to pay for these rising fossil fuel costs. And so to alleviate the impact of these rising energy costs, we need to ensure customers are paying fair rates. And the problem is that what the State Corporation Commission has found that Dominion Energy is overcharging customers through their electricity rates. Only in 2021, Dominion overcharged customers $152 million, and Dominion has accumulated these overcharges over the years, and since 2009, they have overcharged by $1.9 billion. This is money that the utilities should have not collected in the first place, and this is money that should be in customers' pockets. So in summary, Dominion's electricity rates are too high. And so how do we fix this overcharging problem? Easy. Oh, how do you go to the next slide? Oh, there you go. Sorry. So the solution is very easy. We need a reform to restore the State Corporation Commission authority to adjust rates and prevent overcharges. And it is very important to remember that the commission regulates utility profits. Why? Because these utilities are monopolies that face no competition. And if a utility charges customers above its authorized profit, the commission should reduce the rates of this utility. This is how it works in every other state with regulated utility monopolies. However, in Virginia, throughout the years, utilities have lobbied the General Assembly to pass bills that prevent the commission from decreasing rates. And this is how we have these, very big overcharges by Dominion Energy in particular. So in summary, customers are paying inflated rates that are above what is necessary to maintain reliable electricity service and a healthy electric utility industry. And they're unnecessary to pay for clean energy. So they are above what we need to pay for the clean energy transition. And again, to fix this, we urgently need to restore the State Corporation Commission authority to adjust rates and prevent utilities from accumulated more unjustified overcharges. Luckily, these solutions have enjoyed bipartisan support, so we hope that this year is going to be the year where we stop these overcharges. Briefly, I want to just talk really quickly about other very important solutions for an affordable clean energy transition. Of course, energy efficiency, and we also need to protect customers against utility shutoffs. So you can see in this map, we're part of the shame club of states that are in gray that do not have any protections against shutoffs during extreme weather events. So in conclusion, we need to stop utility overcharges, more energy efficiency, and protections against shutoffs. And I'm going to stop there. Thank you so much. And I hope we can count with your support for all these reforms.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Laura. That's really helpful to hear what y'all are laser focused on this year. And our next speaker is Victoria Higgins from the Chesapeake Climate Action Network to talk a little bit more about transit. So Victoria, go ahead.
Good morning from rainy Richmond, Virginia. No slides from me, so you'll just have to deal with me blathering for a couple minutes. But you may have heard from other folks in this group that transportation is our #1 source of emissions in Virginia, over half, and that personal vehicles are responsible for the lion's share, so close to 70%. We've got a good policy that we've covered already to transition to electric vehicles in Virginia, but the greatest short-term benefits that we can accrue from an emissions standpoint are the miles that we don't drive. And that means getting places by walking and biking and by transit. So transit for us is a key climate solution on top of being an essential tool to get you where you need to go if you don't have or don't want or can't pay for a car. And transit also just creates richer, more vibrant, denser, more accessible neighborhoods. The Transit Equity and Modernization Study came out this year and revealed that stop infrastructure in particular is deeply lacking and also inconsistent between service areas or even on a given route. So that's bus shelters, sidewalks, lighting, really basic stuff. And this forces riders into unsafe or unpleasant conditions, and it deters people from using transit. It also showed that transit agencies are very interested on their own in transitioning to zero emission buses, but they need guidance and they need money to get there. So in 2020, a coalition including many folks here created a program called the Transit Ridership Incentive Program, or TRIP. It allocates funds to projects that don't fit neatly in the capital or operating budgets. And currently TRIP funds can be used for two things, both of which are great: zero or low fare transit. So think about programs like Richmond's free bus service that's being piloted in several cities across the Commonwealth and counties. And two, increasing connectivity between routes in populous urban areas. So what we call regional connectivity. And both of these are great uses of money, and we need to continue to provide funding for them. But what has happened is that because TRIP is new and its eligible uses are somewhat niche, and the policy got interfered with, unfortunately, a little bit last year, the TRIP pot of money is kind of overflowing. And so that sounds like a good thing, but when lawmakers see money piling up somewhere, they say, ooh, and suddenly that money finds itself somewhere else. So to protect the existing program and to fund the needs outlined in the Transit Equity and Modernization Study, the Virginia Transit Alliance, VTA, and others have crafted a bill that will expand the eligible uses of TRIP funds to improve bus stops and to provide guidance for transitioning to zero emission fleets. The latter is the part that sounds really sexy, I guess, if you're in the transit world. And it is important, but I want to emphasize how critical getting to adequate bus infrastructure is, both for increasing use of transit as a climate solution and for increasing the quality of experience for the hundreds of thousands of Virginians that rely on transit every day. So that's on TRIP. And then just a brief word of caution. We don't know what's going to be in the governor's budget. But unfortunately, we're almost always in a position of needing to protect existing funding for transit. So keep your eyes on your inboxes or reach out to me in January in the event that we get some bad budget amendments for transit.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Victoria, to McKenna and Laura. We have one more minute left. So I just want to, McKenna, we had a lot of good questions, lots of people interested in solar schools, as I mentioned. So I just want to ask if you're still there, one or two quick follow-up questions to get folks interested. And then again, encourage people to reach out to McKenna directly. But McKenna, the questions were really about some of the other school programs that you may or may not be tracking. So how much kind of electric buses and heat pumps are also part of this conversation as we're talking about putting solar up onto our schools. And then the second question is are private schools eligible as well as public schools for some of the IRA money that you mentioned that is coming down? And if you have answers to those questions, great. If not, we can have folks reach out to you so we can figure them out later, but just wanted to rise those two questions to you.
Thank you. As it relates to the latter question, private schools are eligible to receive the 30% investment tax credit for the installation of solar. And I appreciate Kate for asking that question, and maybe others did as well. And then as it relates to the first question, what I can speak on is that combining energy efficiency savings with the use of energy efficient appliances that are electrified are a part of the overall decrease of like building emissions envelope for the built environment. And that's particularly reflected in schools because it is important, especially in Virginia schools, especially in Richmond schools, where the rate of asthma is quite high and we're considered the asthma capital of the country and the entire country, to use the type of technologies that seek to reduce indoor air pollution and increase the well-being of students that attend the schools of the Commonwealth, specifically with regard to heat pumps. Heat pumps are one of the focuses for the Biden's DPA that was released early, either March or May, one of those months, and combining these technologies with solar, with electrifying our schools, and including electric buses as part of power generation and ways of increasing resiliency in our state schools is a key aspect of the clean energy transition. And I know that one of the Sierra Club Virginia chapter staff members, Sherry Honka, specifically, that's her role, that's her purview of investigating how electric school buses are part of Virginia's clean energy transition. So I can, if anyone wants to get in contact with me, I can connect you with her to specifically talk to the electric school bus aspect, because that's not in my exact purview. But if you would like to learn more about heat pumps and other forms of electrified appliances, please let me know.
Now I've done it to myself, unmuted. Okay, thank you so much, McKenna. Really appreciate it. There were a handful of questions that came in overall on how to take advantage of these federal investments that are coming down through the variety of federal packages. We are all kind of knee deep, particularly from a climate perspective, of making sure that those get infused if they need to get infused in the state budget, if they need to get infused in local budgets. So for that question, I just wanted to address, again, the governor's budget will come out, or his amendments to the 2-year budget that we're in, as Anna mentioned, that budget comes out on December 15th. We will kind of deep dive into that to see what money he is recommending to allocate to various different places from federal pots. If there is money that needs to be allocated through the states that hasn't been done, we will flag it and make sure that we work with you all as well as legislators to get that money tied in. A lot of that money too, though, is either just spending directly from the federal government or getting invested in localities as well. So knowing that there's interest from folks to know more, we will identify what resources are available and make sure to push that out in short order for folks so that you can get more engaged. We are certainly, just like everybody else, really interested and wanting to make sure that those investments are made as strategically as possible. So thanks for those who raised some questions about that. You heard a little bit about it from various different speakers today, and we'll work to get some more comprehensive answers for you as well on that. But the key date is December 15th for the governor's budget, and we'll be reporting out from VCN as soon as we can what is in there, what's missing, and what to do next. Thank you all again so much for joining us. We really, really appreciate it. And we are about to wrap up here. For those of you who are joining us virtually, this is the time. For those of you who are joining us by watching us at a host watch party, now is an opportunity for you to get to know some of the folks in your region. And we encourage you, if you hear one thing from us today, please reach out to your elected officials at the state level. Now is the time. Not the beginning of January when the General Assembly session starts, but right now. So if you can take some time today or next week to write a letter, make a phone call, or even better yet, to set up a meeting with your legislator, the most important thing is for them to hear directly from their constituents or from those who represent constituents if you have a local group that you represent. That's the thing that you can do. You'll get an email from us later that will have information, a huge resource lab that we put together, GA 101 resource lab from VCN that you can get access to learn how to write a letter, how to make a phone call. And we'll also push out a bunch of events that way. Many of our local partners are hosting events over the next 6 weeks to give you the resources that you need on those. So we will make sure that you get that as well. And finally, please save the date. January 31st is Conservation Lobby Day. There are other lobby days happening as well that we will make sure is on that GA 101 website. But save the date for Conservation Lobby Day, and we can't wait to see you there. Thank you all so much for joining us for the General Assembly preview. Those are just some of the things that we can expect. It's going to be a big year in the General Assembly in terms of the environment this year, and we're excited to work with you all in order to make sure that we defend against the things we need to defend against and push forward the things that we need to push forward. So thanks again so much for joining us, and we will see you all soon.